Hollywood expected Cicely Tyson to be grateful. They handed her a script filled with tired cliches. Another maid, another joke, another nameless black woman pushed to the margins. She read it quietly, closed it and slid it back across the table. The executives waited for her polite smile, her obedient yes. Instead, she told them she would rather starve than dishonor the women who raised her. It was the moment she stopped playing their game and began rewriting the rules. Her refusal wasn't arrogance. It was self-defense. Every stereotype she accepted would become another chain around the image of black womanhood. Hollywood had long relied on those chains, and it didn't expect a young actress with limited credits to break them. But Tyson understood something profound. The roles she accepted weren't just roles. They were messages, images, narratives that would be broadcast to millions. When she walked out of that meeting, she knew she'd be punished. And she was. For nearly 2 years she couldn't get hired. People whispered that she was difficult, ungrateful, too proud. But Tyson refused to bow. She held on to her principles even when they cost her a career. What she didn't know was that her defiance was echoing far beyond casting rooms. At barber shops, in beauty salons, in the kitchens of mothers raising daughters in a world that never saw them, her stance became a spark. The idea that a black woman could say no to disrespectful roles was revolutionary. Hollywood wanted silence. Tyson gave them a declaration. She wasn't just rejecting a part, she was rejecting a system that had degraded black women for decades. And in doing so, she opened a door that had never existed before. Her revolution didn't begin with a famous role. It began with a refusal, fierce, unwavering, and unforgettable. A refusal that would go on to change everything. When Cicely Tyson appeared on television with her natural hair, it wasn't a style choice, it was an earthquake. America wasn't used to seeing a black woman without straightened hair, wigs, or anything that softened her identity for white comfort. Tyson stepped onto the screen with a short, textured afro, unapologetic and radiant. Viewers didn't just watch, they reacted. Audiences wrote letters by the hundreds. Some praised the bravery. Others demanded she fix it. A network executive even pulled her aside and asked whether she'd consider straightening it for appearance. Tyson refused again. She knew that millions of black women had been told all their lives that their natural features were unprofessional, unattractive, or unworthy. She was determined to shatter that lie on national television. Her image disrupted the beauty narrative that had dominated America for decades. For young black girls watching, it was the first time they saw someone who looked like them presented as elegant, poised, and dignified, without alteration. Tyson became a mirror they had never been allowed to see. Hollywood may not have understood the impact, but black women did instantly. She wasn't just wearing her own hair, she was reclaiming centuries of identity that had been stripped away. She was showing the world that black beauty didn't need permission to exist. Advertisers panicked. Producers hesitated. But audiences kept watching, not because she was controversial but because she was magnetic. Her presence felt real in a world built on pretending. By simply appearing as herself, Cicely Tyson transformed beauty politics. She didn't ask to change the standard, she demolished it just by existing in her truth. When Cicely Tyson took the role of Rebecca Morgan in Sounder, she wasn't just playing a character, she was carrying the weight of generations. Hollywood had never seen a black woman portrayed with such depth. A mother who was gentle but unbreakable, vulnerable but never defeated, loving without being erased. Tyson demanded the character be human, not symbolic, not tokenized, human. Her performance stunned the nation. People walked into the theater expecting another one-dimensional portrayal. What they got was a revelation. Rebecca Morgan was not a stereotype. She was a fully realized woman with dreams, fears, wisdom, and strength. Black audiences sat in theaters and saw themselves, their mothers, their grandmothers, their aunts, represented with dignity for the first time. Teachers brought entire classes to witness what a truthful portrayal looked like. Critics, many of whom rarely praised black actresses, were speechless. Tyson's Oscar nomination was historic, but she treated it as secondary. The true victory was the recognition that finally Hollywood had been forced to acknowledge the humanity of black women on screen. Behind the scenes, Tyson had fought for every detail: how Rebecca walked, how she held her children, how she spoke. She refused to let the camera capture anything that felt dishonest. She believed black women deserved accuracy, not imagination. The film didn't just succeed, it shifted the landscape. Suddenly, the industry had to admit that audiences were capable of embracing black stories that weren't comedic, subservient, or tragic caricatures. Tyson had proven that women like Rebecca Morgan had always been worthy. Hollywood had simply refused to see it. Sounder wasn't just a role. It was a cultural correction. When Cicely Tyson played Miss Jane Pittman, she didn't just act, she transformed. Over the course of the film, she aged from a teenager into a 110-year-old woman, walking viewers through a full century of Black American history. But the real power wasn't in the makeup or the timeline. It was in the dignity she brought to every stage of that life. As Miss Jane Pittman, Tyson embodied the trauma, resilience, and evolution of Black womanhood in America. Her performance was so believable that viewers genuinely debated whether Pittman had been a real historical figure. Television critics declared it one of the greatest performances ever captured on camera. But the impact reached deeper than applause. In portraying a woman who lived through slavery, Jim Crow, and the civil rights movement, Tyson forced America to confront the truth. Black women had survived every battle this country ever waged, and they had done so with grace and endurance. She wasn't just portraying history, she was history. Church groups held discussions. Schools assigned the film. Families gathered around their televisions to witness a portrayal that felt less like acting and more like testimony. Tyson's performance redefined what a Black actress could do, and what a Black woman could represent. She didn't merely play Miss Jane Pittman, she turned her into an emotional monument. A reminder that Black women carried stories no one had bothered to record, until Tyson insisted they be told. Her performance didn't just move audiences. It immortalized them. By the 1980s, Cicely Tyson wasn't just an actress, she had become the standard. Younger Black actresses studied her roles the way singers study vocal legends. Directors called her to help shape characters. Activists saw her as a cultural guardian. She wasn't famous for who she was famous for what she represented. Her very presence in a role signaled a guarantee of dignity. If Tyson accepted it, audiences knew the character would be layered, respected, and powerful. She had achieved the impossible. She made Hollywood afraid of misrepresenting Black women because they feared her disapproval. Whenever she spoke publicly, she emphasized responsibility over fame. She reminded actresses that every choice they made, every role, every image, every performance, was shaping the perception of Black womanhood in the world. She taught them that acting wasn't just art, it was legacy work. Tyson became the blueprint. She showed that integrity could shape a career more profoundly than opportunity. She demonstrated that rejecting harmful roles could be more influential than accepting famous ones. Black women across the industry echoed her courage, pushing back against stereotypes she had already shattered. Her influence didn't just ripple, it cascaded. From Viola Davis to Angela Bassett to Regina King, every wave of Black actresses carried pieces of her philosophy. Dignity first, truth always, humanity above everything. She didn't redefine Black womanhood by accident. She chiseled it, protected it, and elevated it with every role she ever touched. Cicely Tyson understood something Hollywood never did. Black women didn't need to be loud, angry, or abrasive to be strong. She built a new kind of strength on screen, one defined by clarity, conviction, and unshakable self-respect. Her characters didn't shout, they stood. They didn't break, they endured. And in that endurance, Tyson presented a version of Black womanhood that had rarely been allowed to exist. She broke the stereotype that Black women had to be either suffering saints or comedic relief. Instead, she embodied a steady, dignified force, a quiet storm that reshaped the emotional vocabulary of Black characters. Young actresses took note. They saw that they didn't need to perform pain through chaos. They could express power through stillness, resilience, and emotional precision. In choosing roles that showed complexity instead of spectacle, Tyson dismantled the way Hollywood used to misunderstand Black emotions. She proved that Black women's softness was not weakness, and their strength wasn't hostility. Her characters cried without shame, loved without apology, and fought without theatrics. For millions of Black women watching, this was life-changing. Tyson wasn't projecting who they should be, she was reflecting who they already were. Mothers saw themselves. Daughters saw their future. Grandmothers saw their past finally honored. Tyson's approach rewrote the emotional script of Black femininity. Before her, Black women's inner lives were either invisible or distorted. After her, they became sacred ground. And she stepped into every role as if she were representing an entire lineage, because in her mind, she was. Through her work, she taught America that Black women's strength was profound, expansive, and deeply, beautifully human. For Cicely Tyson, every no was an act of protection. She rejected more roles than she accepted, a radical stance for any actress, but especially for a Black woman in a system offering so few opportunities. Producers would hand her scripts dripping with disrespect, and she would close them before the second page. She was fighting a cultural war and she refused to provide ammunition. Each role she declined helped starve Hollywood's stereotype machine. Without performers willing to fill them, the caricatures began to fade. Tyson's absence became a statement. If the image of black women was going to appear on screen, it would have to rise to a higher standard. These rejections didn't just protect her integrity, they protected millions of viewers from absorbing harmful portrayals. Hollywood had always underestimated the impact of repetition, the damage of constant misrepresentation. Tyson understood it deeply. She'd grown up seeing black women depicted as caricatures, and she would not let that cycle continue through her. Her no's were expensive. Sometimes they cost her work, visibility, and stability. But to her, a compromised image was a far greater cost. She often said, "If it's not going to feed the spirit, I won't do it." And she meant it. She wasn't feeding stereotypes, she was feeding souls. Her rejections became a form of creative activism. They forced writers to reconsider their scripts, forced executives to rethink their assumptions, forced audiences to expect better. In denying Hollywood its usual shortcuts, she forced the industry to confront its own laziness. Her nose cleared a path. And on that path, countless actresses would later walk with pride, safety, and possibility. Cicely Tyson knew that portraying struggle without dignity was another form of violence. When she took on stories rooted in black suffering, slavery, poverty, racism, generational trauma, she insisted that her characters not be defined by their wounds, but by their will to rise. She refused to let black pain become spectacle. In every role she centered triumph. She made sure that even in the darkest scenes, her characters carried a flame that could not be extinguished. Her performances revealed not just what black women had endured, but what they had overcome. That shift changed everything. It turned suffering into testimony, and testimony into legacy. America was accustomed to seeing black women broken. Tyson showed them unbroken. Hollywood was comfortable showcasing defeat. She demanded narratives of resilience. She carved out a sacred space where the struggles of black women became sources of power, not pity. For the first time, audiences saw the full arc: the hurt, the healing, the hope. And because Tyson insisted on portraying all three, black womanhood became a story of survival, not tragedy. Communities watching her felt validated. They felt recognized, honored, uplifted. She didn't erase pain. She reframed it. She showed that black women's suffering deserved reverence, not entertainment. And in doing so, she transformed trauma narratives from weapons into tools of empowerment. Through every performance, Tyson reminded America that the history of black women was not simply one of oppression. It was one of extraordinary endurance and unimaginable triumph. As Tyson grew older, she became something Hollywood had never seen before: a matriarch of integrity. Young actresses gravitated to her, seeking guidance not just on craft but on courage. She taught them that the most important thing they brought to any role was not talent, it was self-respect. She would look actresses in the eyes and ask, "What do you want your image to say to the world?" It was a simple question but a life-changing one. It forced them to recognize their power. Tyson didn't want them to just get work. She wanted them to choose work that reflected truth, strength, and legacy. Her influence shaped careers. Viola Davis has said Tyson didn't just inspire her, she validated her existence. Angela Bassett, Taraji P. Henson, Kimberly Elise, Regina King, all of them carry pieces of Tyson's philosophy in their performances. They didn't inherit her technique, they inherited her purpose. Tyson taught them that acting was not a job but a responsibility. She believed that every role played by a black woman added another brushstroke to the collective portrait of black womanhood in history. That meant each choice mattered. Each image mattered. Each portrayal mattered. Through mentorship, she ensured that her revolution wouldn't die with her. The next generation of actresses didn't just admire her, they continued her mission. They demanded better roles. They demanded depth. They demanded truth. And they demanded respect. By mentoring them, Tyson multiplied herself. She didn't create one successor, she created an army. By the time Cicely Tyson reached the height of her career, Hollywood had changed, and it wasn't by accident. It was because of her. She had forced the industry to expand its imagination. Forced it to recognize the beauty, the power, the complexity of black womanhood. Forced it to admit that its old portrayals were lies. Directors began crafting roles specifically with her in mind, roles that did not exist before she demanded them. Casting agents started searching for actresses who carried her elegance, her presence, her quiet intensity. Studios realized that stories centered on black women could not only succeed, they could become cultural touchstones. Audiences had changed too. They no longer accepted stereotypes as harmless entertainment. They had tasted truth and they wanted more. Tyson trained viewers to expect dignity, complexity, and humanity. And once viewers understood the difference, the old portrayals became unwatchable. Hollywood eventually awarded her honors, lifetime achievements, standing ovations, but none of those reflected the true magnitude of what she did. Her real legacy wasn't on a trophy shelf. It was in the millions of women who finally saw themselves represented with honor. It was in the generations of actresses who rose because she carved a path with her own bare hands. By the end of her life, Cicely Tyson had done more than act. She had redefined an entire identity. She had rebuilt the global image of black womanhood from the ground up. And Hollywood could no longer pretend it happened by accident. Cicely Tyson's rise was never meant to be gentle. It began with resistance, not just from Hollywood executives who insisted that black women could only be loud, comedic, hypersexual, or silent, but from a world that had grown comfortable seeing them small. And yet, Tyson walked into that world with the quiet force of a storm. Long before she ever spoke a line on screen, she made a decision. If a role did not honor black womanhood, she would not take it. It was a choice that sounded noble in interviews, but in real life, it meant poverty, rejections, and years of watching others work while she waited for something worthy. But this was the foundation of her revolution, the refusal to be anything less than true. When she finally appeared in front of a camera, her screen presence unsettled people. She didn't perform blackness the way Hollywood expected. She didn't widen her eyes for laughs, didn't shrink herself to appear harmless, didn't exaggerate pain to satisfy white sympathy. She simply was dignified, reserved, intelligent, quietly powerful. And that alone was radical. Casting directors would ask her to smile more, sass it up, or loosen her hair. Cicely refused. She kept her natural hair at a time when it was considered unprofessional. She demanded roles that showed black women thinking, loving, enduring, rising. Every no, she said, cost her money, but it bought her integrity, and eventually it bought her history. Her breakthrough came with Sounder, a film studios expected to fail because it depicted a black sharecropping family not as caricatures, but as human beings. Oppression was present, yes, but so was tenderness, resilience, and the quiet heroism of a mother protecting her children. As Rebecca, Tyson gave a performance that didn't come from training alone. It came from memory, lineage, and lived truth. She spoke lines with the weight of generations behind them. When the film was released, audiences fell silent. Critics wrote that her presence was the kind that rewrites the screen. And suddenly Hollywood's unspoken rule, that black women couldn't lead, cracked. Yet even then, Tyson could have drifted into fame and vanished into safer roles. Instead, she went straight into a role no one wanted to touch, the autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman. To portray a woman who ages from 19 to 110, Tyson immersed herself so deeply into the physicality of age that makeup artists stepped back in disbelief. Her performance became a masterclass in restraint, the kind that transforms acting into testimony. But the significance wasn't just artistic. Here, on primetime American television, Tyson made millions confront the full timeline of black womanhood, from a young enslaved girl to a century-old witness to Jim Crow and the Civil Rights era. She didn't entertain. She educated, provoked, and demanded empathy. And suddenly the image of the black woman, long flattened into stereotypes, became expansive. She could be fragile or fierce, young or ancient, rural or elegant, oppressed or triumphant. Tyson had forced Hollywood to acknowledge her complexity. The roles she accepted afterward followed the same strict moral compass. Sharecroppers, mothers, teachers, activists, women whose quiet strength reshaped their worlds. She turned down roles that degraded black women, even when money was scarce. She told directors no, with the grace of someone who knew the power of her yes. Off-screen, she became a mentor to a generation of actresses who finally saw someone who looked like them on magazine covers, in lead roles in award ceremonies, not as tokens but as pioneers. And through it all, Tyson understood the responsibility she carried. She once said, "I realized that I could not afford the luxury of just being an actress." In that sentence lies the truth of her legacy. Her career was not a pursuit of glamour, but a mission. By the time she reached her later years, tributes poured in. Not because she had simply acted, but because she had altered the lens through which black women were viewed worldwide. She had given them dignity on screen when the world denied it off-screen. She had demanded roles that reflected their strength. She had delivered performances that made their humanity undeniable. Cicely Tyson didn't just change Hollywood. She changed perception. She changed representation. She changed possibility. She changed what it meant for a black woman to be seen, fully, truthfully, unapologetically. And that is why, decades after her first role, her face remains a symbol. A reminder that sometimes the most powerful rebellions begin with a single word spoken softly but firmly. No. And because of that no, an entire generation learned how to say yes to themselves.